You get an invitation. A wealthy Roman, a titan of the empire, is hosting a banquet. You imagine gilded halls, philosophers debating, exquisite wines, perhaps some fresh olives. You arrive, ready for sophistication. Instead, the air hits you first. A cloying, putrid stench of fish, bile, and something indefinably foul. Then you see it. A guest, face pale, leaning over a couch, a slave holding a silver bowl as they violently empty their stomach. Another, less discreet, simply relieves themselves on the marble floor. And this is before they even bring out the main course. Flamingo tongues, swimming in a dark, viscous liquid that looks suspiciously like sewage. Welcome to the true nightmare of Roman dining. Forget the Hollywood fantasies of elegant toga-clad senators. Forget the golden goblets and polite chatter. Roman feasts were not just meals. They were grotesque endurance tests, displays of excess so depraved, so utterly stomach-churning, they'd make a modern frat party look like afternoon tea. These weren't just gatherings. They were competitive eating marathons, mixed with public bodily functions and delicacies that would violate every modern health code imaginable. But before we dive deeper into this abyss of ancient dining disasters, smash that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. Because if you think this is bad, wait until next week when we expose what Vikings actually drank from human skulls. Trust me, after today, you'll never complain about restaurant service again. Now, let's confront the most infamous, yet misunderstood, aspect of Roman feasts, the vomitorium. You've heard the myth, a special room for throwing up. That's wrong. Vomitoriums were passages in amphitheaters. The real horror. Wealthy Romans didn't need a special room. They vomited wherever they were dining. It was utterly, sickeningly normal. Imagine, you're mid-conversation and your host casually excuses himself. He steps behind his couch. A slave appears with a feather and a bowl, and he induces vomiting right there at the table. Then, he returns, refreshed, ready for more. The Romans had a saying chilling in its honesty. Vomit ut edunt, edunt ut vomant. They vomit to eat, and eat to vomit. Seneca, the philosopher, described it in gruesome detail. Guests would drink warm water to ease the process, leaning over couches, their retching caught by slaves in gleaming silver bowls. The truly elite had specially trained vomit collectors, slaves whose sole, degrading purpose was to stand ready, bowl and cloth in hand, to catch the outpouring from their masters' mouths. The stench must have been an oppressive cloud, a permanent miasma of decay and bile. Yet Romans considered this the height of sophistication. Even physicians like Celsus endorsed it, prescribing therapeutic vomiting twice a month in winter, daily in summer. Upper-class Romans began their day by drinking lukewarm salt water, forcing themselves to vomit, then heading to the baths. They believed this cleansed their systems, preparing them for the day's gastronomic onslaught. Can you imagine? Starting every single morning by deliberately throwing up and calling it healthy? Emperor Claudius, a man of legendary appetites, was so devoted to mid-meal vomiting, he considered making it illegal to hold in any bodily function at dinner parties. He'd personally demonstrate, vomiting at the table, then immediately demanding more food. His terrified guests were forced to pretend this was perfectly normal. One account details Claudius vomiting directly onto the table itself. Slaves silently, swiftly cleaned it, and service continued, without a single acknowledgement of the horror. But as revolting as the vomiting was, it was often the least disgusting part of Roman dining. Let's talk about their delicacies. The Roman cookbook, Apicius, reads like a culinary nightmare. Flamingo tongues, a particular favorite, Hundreds of these majestic birds slaughtered just for their tiny tongues, served floating in garum. What is garum? Only the most nauseating condiment ever conceived by humanity. It was made by leaving fish intestines, gills, and blood to rot in the sun for months, sometimes years, until they liquefied into a putrid, fermented sludge. Romans slathered this vile, rotten fish liquid on everything: meat, vegetables, even mixed it into their wine. The smell was so offensive, so utterly overpowering, that garum workshops were banned from within city limits. Pliny the Elder branded them plague factories, attracting swarms of disease-carrying flies. Yet, Romans were addicted. The fermentation created a chunky, gray-brown liquid, thick with partially decomposed organs. They poured it over their finest dishes like we use ketchup. Dormice were another treat. These small rodents were kept in special clay jars, gorged on acorns and chestnuts until grotesquely fat, then drowned in wine, roasted, and served whole. Guests would crunch through their tiny bones. The sound of dozens of people munching on roasted mouse skeletons was apparently part of the dining experience. Petronius describes dormice served covered in honey and poppy seeds. Imagine biting into a honey-glazed rat, but nothing compared to the Trojan pig. This was a whole pig, roasted, but stuffed with live birds. When carved at the table, the birds, if they survived the cooking, would burst forth, fluttering frantically, sometimes half dead, onto the linen. Guests would applaud, delighted. The pig itself was stuffed with sausages made from its own intestines, mixed with blood and garum. Cutting into it released a wave of putrid steam, which Romans considered appetizing. The lengths Romans went for exotic ingredients defied belief. Pickled jellyfish from the Black Sea, fermented mare's milk from Scythia, laser, a plant so overharvested for Roman tables, it went extinct, ostrich brains, parrot heads, camel heels. Apicius even has a recipe for flamingo boiled in dates, honey, vinegar, and garum. A combination food historians who've dared to recreate it describe as aggressively disgusting. Emperor Vitellius's infamous Shield of Minerva platter contained pike livers, peacock brains, flamingo tongues, and lamprey spawn. It took dozens of ships scouring the empire to gather the ingredients. The cost of one such dinner could feed a common family for years. Vitellius once ate 1,000 oysters in a single sitting, followed by lamb intestines stuffed with egg yolks and pig brains. Suetonius noted he maintained this monstrous appetite by frequent vomiting, sometimes 4 times during one meal. Speaking of emperors, their dinner parties were pure competitions in revolting excess. Nero's Golden House boasted a dining room with a rotating ceiling that dropped flower petals and perfume on guests. Sounds lovely, right? Until you learn so many petals fell that several guests suffocated. Others were crushed when mechanical ceiling panels malfunctioned, dropping hundreds of pounds of roses. Imagine dying at dinner, smothered by flowers, while others just kept eating around your corpse. Caligula, a man synonymous with sadism, delighted in serving food that looked appealing but was dangerous or disgusting. He'd serve bread and meat made of solid gold, literally inedible metal, shaped like food. Guests had to pretend to enjoy chewing gold, their teeth cracking. He once served what appeared to be mushrooms, but were actually poisonous fungi causing hallucinations. Several senators died while Caligula laughed at their weakness. Elagabalus was even worse. He invented surprise feasts where cushions would suddenly deflate, dropping guests into pools of wine where some drowned. He'd release hundreds of live snakes during dessert. Once, he served exact replicas of food made of wax, glass, or marble. Guests who didn't pretend to eat the fake food were executed. He even pioneered eating flowers, entire meals of roses, violets, and lilies that cause severe digestive distress. The sheer duration of these banquets amplified the repulsiveness. A proper feast lasted 8 to 10 hours, sometimes continuing for days. Petronius's famous Feast of Trimalchio went on so long that slaves had to carry out guests who'd passed out or even died. Bodies were simply moved aside as the feast continued. Imagine stepping over unconscious diners just to reach the food tables. During these marathon sessions, bodily functions couldn't be ignored. Chamber pots were placed around dining rooms, and it was completely acceptable to relieve yourself without leaving the table. The poet Martial describes a dinner where a guest defecated directly onto his dining couch. Slaves simply changed the cushions while he continued eating. The combined stench of vomit, urine, feces, rotting food, and garum must have been an unbearable assault on the senses. Yet, Romans saw this as proof of a successful party. The social pressure to participate was immense, a suffocating demand for conformity. Refusing to vomit when others did was considered rude. Not eating something offered by your host, no matter how utterly revolting, was a deadly insult. Pliny the Younger recounts forcing himself to eat rotten peacock eggs at an imperial banquet. Refusal would mean social and political suicide. He spent 3 days violently ill, but considered it a small price to pay for maintaining favor. Even Roman doctors enabled this grotesque behavior. They prescribed emetics, vomit-inducing drugs, to be taken before feasts. They created digestive aids from ground-up bedbugs and spider webs. One medical text recommended eating raw owl eggs to prevent drunkenness, followed by pickled sheep lungs to strengthen the stomach for extended dining. These remedies often caused more harm than the overeating itself. The cleanup after these feasts was a literal nightmare. Slaves spent days scrubbing vomit from marble, collecting food debris mixed with bodily fluids, burning incense in a desperate attempt to mask the lingering smells. Many slaves assigned to banquet duty died from diseases contracted during cleanup. Excavated Roman dining rooms show permanent staining on the floors from various bodily fluids that no amount of cleaning could ever remove. Even the entertainment was designed to shock. Between courses, Romans enjoyed watching public executions, gladiator fights, and torture. Nero famously had criminals covered in pitch and burned alive as human torches to light his evening banquets. Their screams were considered atmospheric. Domitian once held a funeral feast where guests were served by naked boys painted black in a room decorated like a tomb, while actors portrayed their own deaths. Several elderly senators suffered heart attacks from sheer terror. Perhaps most disturbing was how utterly normalized this all was. Roman children attended these feasts, watching adults vomit, defecate, and consume truly revolting foods as standard behavior. Young aristocrats learned that sophistication meant enduring and pretending to enjoy. Absolutely disgusting experiences. Letters between Roman friends casually mentioned dinner parties, where half the guests got food poisoning or someone died from overeating, as if describing the weather. The fall of Rome, that great empire, might partially be blamed on their dining habits. Lead, poisoning from wine vessels and plates was epidemic. Gout from excessive eating crippled the upper classes. Parasites from poorly cooked exotic meats ravaged their digestive systems. The vast resources wasted on importing flamingo tongues and fermenting fish guts could have fed entire armies. Instead, Rome literally ate itself to death, one revolting banquet at a time. Archaeological evidence isn't speculation. Excavated Roman latrines near dining rooms reveal parasites from exotic meats. Chemical analysis of dining room floors confirms traces of garum, wine, and human waste. Skeletons of wealthy Romans bear the unmistakable marks of diseases directly linked to their dining habits: obesity, gout, lead poisoning, and parasitic infections that must have made their lives a constant, agonizing hell. The contrast with modern dining is profoundly shocking. We fret over using the right fork or chewing with our mouths closed. Romans considered it sophisticated to vomit on command and relieve themselves at the table. We refrigerate food for safety. They deliberately rotted fish for months to create a sauce. We have health inspections. They had slaves whose sole job was catching vomit. Every rule of modern dining etiquette exists precisely because of how absolutely, unbelievably disgusting ancient dining could be. So next time you're at a restaurant and someone complains about slow service or undersalted food, remind them, at least nobody's vomiting between courses. The sauce isn't made from rotten fish intestines. And you're reasonably sure you won't die from lead poisoning or suffocate under flower petals. Roman banquets weren't just meals. They were grotesque endurance contests where the prize was simply surviving until dessert. Those toga-clad Romans we imagine discussing philosophy over wine, they were actually trying not to gag on flamingo tongues while sitting in pools of their own vomit, pretending to enjoy foods that would be classified as biohazards today. The glory of Rome was built on marble, military might, and meals so revolting they killed more aristocrats than warfare. Now that's what I call a dinner party to die for, literally. Think Roman banquets were stomach-turning? Next week, we're exposing what Vikings actually put in those drinking horns. Spoiler alert, it wasn't just mead. And yes, it involved human body parts. Subscribe now and hit that notification bell because ancient dining gets even worse than rotten fish sauce and competitive vomiting. Share this with someone who complains about their food. And comment below which Roman delicacy made you gag the most. Until next time, remember, civilization is just 3 meals away from drinking garum.